In Jesus' name, amen. The question today is a simple one, and yet it may trip you up just a little bit, and it's this. Are you loyal to a fault or not? Loyal to a fault or not? This is the theme for our day and our time together right now. If you were to go to your favorite restaurant and they were having a very bad day, you know, maybe you got there and it took a while to get seated. Or maybe you got seated and it took a while before you got your drinks. Or maybe it took a while before they they got your order, or you had to wait a long time to get it from the kitchen, or when you got it, it was cold, or your service stunk, or whatever it may be. Your favorite restaurant's having a bad day. How many of you would go back the next time? Anybody? Would anybody go back? Interestingly, a survey was done across America that said if their favorite restaurant were having a bad day, 33% of Americans would not return to that restaurant. It's interesting. You know, if it's a brand new restaurant that you go to and they're having a bad day, maybe it's the first time you've gone to that restaurant, we may not go back. You know, I have family members that they get one shot at this deal. I mean, if we go to a restaurant, it's the first time they've been to the restaurant, and they have a bad day, man, that is like anathema. I mean, we're done. It's over. I mean, we're never going back to that restaurant again. And I'm like, okay, they just had a bad day. Well, you know, and so we get into a conversation. Did you know that an emotional connection increases loyalty 4 times, or 400-fold? 400% increase. If there's an emotional connection. So if you go to this restaurant and you know the server and they're waiting on you, or maybe you know the chef, or maybe you know the cook, or you know the management, or you know somebody and you're connected with them and they have a really bad day, you're 4 times more likely to go back than you would have if you didn't have any such connection. But this loyalty factor is not only when it comes to restaurants. This loyalty factor comes in every facet of our life. If there's an emotional connection, you're 4 times more likely to stay involved in that situation. What's interesting is loyalty seems to be based today. Loyalty today is based on experiences and emotions. If the experience is right, then I'll continue on in this relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or it's a business relationship, it's a religious relationship or a community relationship. If the experience is right, I'll continue on. If there's an emotional connection, then I will continue on. But if there's not that, then we're not as loyal maybe as we once were. Loyalty is a difficulty. So when we look at a question like this, am I loyal to a fault or not? In a context such as this, then there's 2 follow-up questions, and these are for you to think about. When we consider, am I loyal to a fault or not, am I as loyal to Jesus as I am to that restaurant? Am I as loyal to the church as I am to that restaurant? And so we have to consider something, and now our minds have shifted in a different way, and now we're looking at loyalty in a different kind of way because we're looking at Jesus. Today, we're going to find a group of people that were loyal to God. This group of people were loyal to the point of death, and they were encouraged to be loyal to the point of death. In fact, some would say they might be loyal to a fault. And so as you join me in Revelation chapter 2 today, we're going to look at verses 8 through 11. And in these verses, we're going to look at the church of Smyrna. And this church, of course, there are 7 churches that have letters written to them. 2 of the 7 churches, Jesus found no fault in. Today's church is one of those. Smyrna, Jesus didn't accuse them of anything. He didn't have a fault that he could find within them. Their loyalty was so high that Jesus praises them in this moment. And so I want us to look at this, that even though Smyrna is having bad experiences and difficult emotions, they are remaining true. Look with me, verse 8 of Revelation chapter 2. Write to the angel of the church in Smyrna, thus says the first and the last, the one who was dead and came to life. So, they're writing to the pastor, that's the angel of the church, they're writing to the pastor so he could share it with the church. And the descriptor there after that is describing Jesus. So this is what he was supposed to write. I know your affliction and poverty, but you are rich. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Don't be afraid of what you're about to suffer. Look, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison to test you, and you're going to experience affliction for 10 days. Be faithful to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. Let anyone who has ears to hear listen to what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will never be harmed by the second death. Am I loyal to a fault or not? I mean, this is a serious question that we all have to ask ourselves. It goes back to the first sermon in this series when we looked at how who is the greater than the do. That I can be active, but if I don't know Jesus, then the activity is wasted. And if I do all kinds of activity, but I don't have Jesus as the center, then I'm wasting my time. And then we talked about how we need to love first so love will last. And that Jesus is our motivator for love. Jesus then is also our motivator for loyalty. Am I loyal to a fault or not? And I want us to ask and to think and to consider this question throughout the rest of our time together. Because this church at Smyrna was loyal. And so that raises the question for us, are we loyal to that fault or not? So, here's what I want to do. I want to give you 2 thoughts today to help us remember to be loyal. And here's the first one. Bad experiences don't mean God hates you. Bad experiences don't mean that God hates you. See, sometimes we get this feeling. Sometimes good-meaning men and women and our friends will tell us or make us feel like this. That because I'm going through a bad experience, well, God hates me. In fact, you might have even thought that. Or maybe you might have jokingly said that. Well, boy, God has it in for me this week. But the reality is, the bad experience that you may be having does not equate to God hating you. Sometimes bad experiences are just bad experiences. Sometimes when you're going through a bad moment, it's just something you're going through. Sometimes as a result of what somebody else has done that you're having to face and to deal with. Sometimes the bad experience that you're going through is your own doing. Now, we want to blame God, but reality is sometimes it's just we got ourselves stuck. We got ourselves in a mess. And so what we need to realize and we need to understand is that just because I'm going through a bad experience, that does not mean that God hates me. The church at Smyrna is going through affliction and poverty in verse 9. Jesus says, I know your affliction and your poverty. That doesn't have to define you. Why? Because he says, but you're rich. Now, to those that are impoverished, when somebody says you're rich, we sometimes have different ideas of what that means. If you're in poverty and somebody, hey, but you're rich. They're like, no, I'm not. Why? Because we're coming at it from two different perspectives. Many years ago, we took a mission trip down to Juarez, and as we were going out to the outskirts of town, there was what is called Cardboard City. And Cardboard City is just as you would think it. Every house, every building that they had, it was all made out of scrap cardboard. And they would piece it together, and when the rainstorm comes, they'd have to piece new stuff together. They lived in cardboard houses. They would have communal meetings in a cardboard building that they fashioned. And when you would go and be among them in Cardboard City, just the very term that we as rich Americans might come up with, calling it Cardboard City, was already speaking to our view of this. That's not what they called it. You know what they called it? Home. It's just home to them. Certainly, they could look down from the mountain that they were up on. They could see the nice houses down in the city, in the urban area, and they can see all that. But they didn't necessarily all fall into the trap that says, well, we are so bad off. Yes, there were differences, but the idea that you can be in poverty but be rich has more to do with your heart and your mind than it does your pocketbook. And Jesus is more concerned about our heart and our mind than he is our pocketbook. He wants us to have a right heart and a right mind. And some of you are already going to the fact, I know it. I know you, and I know where some of you are going. Hey, if God doesn't care about my pocketbook, when that offering plate comes by, I don't have to do anything. If your heart's right, you will. If your attitude is right, you will. Because that's what determines our life and our direction, isn't it? Our heart and our attitude. If our heart and mind are right, then we can take whatever is on us and stay loyal. This is what the church of Smyrna was doing. Jesus said, hey, I know what you're going through. You're going through some bad experiences, but I want you to know that I'm with you all the way through that. And I want to encourage you that even though on the outside it looks bad, I want you to know that it's not the end. That what we face in this life is this life. And sometimes we face negativity, and sometimes we face outright evil. Sometimes we have bad experiences. And the encouragement for us today is to recognize it does not mean God hates us. It's a challenge for us. Will I be loyal to a fault or not? Will I remain loyal throughout the process? See, we can look at the outside and assume much. My mom would have a saying when I was growing up, and this was not original to her. Many of you have used this as well, and every librarian has used this same phrase. You can't judge a book by its cover. You can't judge a book by its cover, and yet we're all guilty of it. I got a gift card over Christmas that was to half-price books. Somebody really knew my heart. And not only is it books, but they were half-price books, man. That's awesome. I mean, that's like a double positive right there. That's just awesome. So we take a day trip as a family. We go to the big one over in Dallas, that whole block-sized one over there. And we enjoyed our time. But I found myself, I was looking for some specific types of books. And I caught myself looking down the aisle. And the books that caught my eye were bright colored or had cool sounding titles. and I prejudged what the Plain Jane book was. How many of us do that? We judge a book by its cover. We look at somebody who's poor and we judge them already. Or we look at somebody who's massively rich and we judge them. We look at somebody in church, or we look at somebody who's not in church and we judge them. We don't give one another a chance. We prejudge, and we are assuming some things. We are judging a book by its cover. When Smyrna is going through all of these things, it could be assumed that, wow, well, I don't know what's going on in that church that they're going through all that stuff. It may not be anything other than they're doing something right the devil doesn't like. The question is whether they'll be loyal or not. And we can remain loyal when we take the long view of our experiences. The second thing I want you to know today is this, down in verse 10. It says, don't be afraid of what you're about to suffer. Look, the devil's about to throw some of you into prison to test you, and you'll experience affliction for 10 days. So the first thing says that bad experiences don't mean that God hates you. Negative emotions, that doesn't mean God hates you either. Negative emotions. Bad emotions doesn't mean that God may have left you. See, we feel this sense of abandonment. Well, we have this false sense and this false idea that says, well, if I'm in Jesus, I'm happy all the time. If I'm in Jesus, I don't have bad days. That's not true. You can be totally in Jesus and have a bad day too. You can be totally in Jesus and you can have a sense of chaos and unrest in your life. And you can be totally into Jesus but still struggle through some different negative emotions that we face. Sometimes because of things that have happened to us, sometimes because of things happening around us, and sometimes because of imbalances within us. But we can have bad or negative emotions. It doesn't mean you've been abandoned by God. God is completely loyal to us. The question then is, am I loyal to a fault or not to God? Am I loyal to Him? So much of our world believes in this sense of karma. That if you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. We look at that, and much of our world lives by this. But the Christian life is flipped upside down sometimes. The Christian life, you can be doing all the right things for God with all the right mind and all the right heart, and you can love Him and you can be loyal to Him, and in your day, today or tomorrow or this week, something awful may happen. And it's going to be tempting for all of us to then turn to God and say, how could you? The encouragement for us today is to open our hearts and open our hands and open our minds and say, God, I need you. Am I loyal to a fault or not? And this is what it comes down to. Because many believe that if I'm having bad experiences or bad emotions or bad situations, well, the universe must be trying to get my attention. But for the believer, there's something different. For the believer, it's something wholly different. We go through things and we feel things deeply sometimes. And it doesn't mean that God hates me, and it doesn't mean that God's left me. It means that I'm dealing with something. The question that I need to be asking is, God, what are you teaching me through this? God, how can I stay loyal to you through this moment? God, I need you. And the more open that I am, the more that God can fill me. For Smyrna, this is a badge of courage. They were going to be loyal no matter what. And we remain loyal again when we look at the longer view. Don't get caught up in today's emotion. Don't get caught up in today's experience. Look at the long view. Look at the history of things. And you can see how God is working through all of these different moments in your life. I can go back, and so can you. I can go back and put a timeline together, and I can mark, hey, this bad thing happened, and this bad thing happened, and this bad thing happened. My mom was 15 when she had me, and she put me up for adoption. Woe is me. Or I can say, hey, at 28 days old, two people that loved Jesus wanted me and took me into their home and raised me as their own, though biologically I'm not. You can look at the good, or you can look at the bad. I can look and say, hey, when it was December of my 4th grade year, my mom and dad decided we needed to pack up, and God sent us someplace else, and Dad took a transfer, and we moved from California to Kentucky. And I can look and say, hey, I left everything behind, everything I knew, everything I loved. Man, all my friends, they're gone, and now I got to start all over. And I can look at that and go, how bad that is. Or I can look back and see that God was training me and teaching me for something. And I can look and say, hey, you know, when I was in 8th grade, I started one school, went to another school in another city for 6 months, and ended in a third different school in a third different city before I ever made it out of 8th grade. And I could be ticked off at my dad for what he did, or in my mind, what he did. Or I could simply say, God, there were days I had no clue what you were doing with me. But as I look back, I can see how you were teaching me, and how you are preparing me for what you want me to be today. See, we can all go back. We can all go back and put our timeline together, and you can run through all the negative things and come to a conclusion. Hey, God hates me, God left me. But if you're honest, you can also go back, and if you're willing to ask the question, you can also see the hand of God through all those moments, and how God was moving and teaching and reacting and helping you through each of those times to get you where you are today. So don't get caught up in today's experience and today's emotion. Take the longer view and see how God has been working. We cannot, as believers today, we cannot let circumstances determine our moment. We can't. We can't do that. We do it often, but we ought not be doing that. Don't let circumstances define your moment, and don't let comments by other people to you, about you, or on social media determine your mood for the day. Because some people are just rude, and some people are just mean, and some people are just jealous, and I am fully convinced that with some people, the devil is typing on their keyboard. And if you read that and you're going to let comments determine your mood for the day, you're going to be sour all day long. Don't let comments determine your mood. Don't let circumstances determine your moment. Am I loyal to a fault or not? See, this is the encouragement, and this is the question you have to answer today. So we begin to wonder, how can I show loyalty? What does loyalty look like? Miss Dulcie's right, it's kind of hard to define loyalty without using the word loyalty, right? I mean, you can use fidelity, but we walk into the same situation. You can use faithfulness, and you walk into the same situation. So ask yourself these questions. Do I stay longer than needed? Do I stay longer than I'm needed? Do I stay after? Do I find myself taking on more than other people? This is volunteerism. This is attendance. Do I keep silent when I really want to talk about it? That's discretion. Do I think of others more than I think of myself? This is humility. Am I single-minded and single-focused? These are the attributes of Jesus. Our world and our community, your family and your friends need to see Christianity in its loyalty form. Our friends and our family in this community, they need to see Jesus, and the way that we show them Jesus is through our loyalty to Jesus. Because we're tired of hypocrisy. We see that every day. We hear that every day on the radio. We hear it on TV. We hear it on the radio. We hear it and we see it, and it turns our stomach. And hypocrisy is something we can't stand, and we don't want to stomach it any longer. And so do all of our friends and family and community neighbors. So it is up to us to show loyalty in the midst of difficult experiences and difficult emotions. That I'm going to be loyal to a fault. Are you?